When the US threatened 145% tariffs on Chinese imports, it didn't just rattle factories. It exposed something much darker. Behind the scenes, a hidden economy snapped into motion. Fake paperwork, ghost routes through Southeast Asia, no extra cost shipping promises that dodge massive duties. And if you're an importer, it all sounds too good to be true because it is. What's really happening is fraud. Underdeclared values, forged documents, and shipments relabeled to hide their true Chinese origin. And sure, Trump just announced a 90-day pause on new tariffs, but don't let that headline fool you. Importers are still paying over 30% on top of the original Trump-era duties. The pressure hasn't gone away. It's just gone underground, quiet, systematic, and still very much alive. And here's what most US importers don't realize. You don't have to be the one filling out customs forms to get caught up in this. If your supplier is cutting corners and your goods are part of the scheme, you could still be on the hook. Now, I've been importing for over 18 years. I've seen factories get desperate. I've seen honest businesses get burned, and I've seen how easy it is to land into legal trouble just by trusting the wrong supplier. So in this video, I'm pulling back the curtain on how tariff fraud actually works and what every importer needs to know before the next wave of enforcement hits. So my business is a 7-figure e-commerce store over at bumblebeelinens.com, and I've been doing this for over 18 years. When Trump introduced the 145% tariffs on Chinese goods, I hit pause on all of my orders. And instead, I've been slowly diverting my supply chain to India, Europe, and even the United States. My Chinese suppliers were disappointed, of course, but they understood. With tariffs more than doubling my costs, placing a large order for linens just did not make sense at the present time. So a couple of quiet weeks passed, and then out of nowhere, I got a message from one of my longtime suppliers, and here's what they said. Don't worry about the tariffs. Just place the order. It won't cost you anything. We'll cover 100% of the duties and the tariffs. Now it sounded perfect. Too perfect, and that's because it was. Now I've been working with this supplier for over a decade. There's been a lot of trust built up over the years. But even so, I was immediately skeptical. How could a company operating on razor-thin margins possibly afford to eat a 145% tariff? And obviously, they weren't going to actually pay those duties, so I asked them directly. This sounds too good to be true. How are you pulling this off? And here's what they told me. We'll ship it to you DDP. We'll handle everything. Tariffs, customs, taxes. The goods will be delivered straight to your door. Now, if you're not familiar with the term DDP, it stands for Delivered Duty Paid. That means the seller covers everything. Shipping, insurance, import taxes, customs clearance, until the product arrives at your door. In other words, the price that they are quoting is all-inclusive. So I pressed them, how is this even possible? And that's when they said something that made my stomach drop. Don't worry, you won't be the importer of record, it is 100% safe. But here's what they weren't saying out loud, and it's what could get you into serious trouble if you aren't careful. Now let me pause for a second and break this down, because if you've never imported before, this part is important. Normally, when you bring in goods from China, you list your company as the importer of record. That means you're legally responsible for everything. If there's any fraud, undervalued goods, false paperwork, you could face massive fines or in serious cases, even jail time. But in this case, the supplier was saying that they would act as the importer of record. Technically, I'd just be a buyer receiving the goods already in the United States. And while they never outright admitted to fraud, I could read in between the lines. Here's what was really happening. They planned to undervalue the shipment, claiming the goods were worth a fraction of the actual cost, potentially slashing the tariff bill by up to 145%. That is textbook customs fraud. But since they'd be listed as the importer of record, they'd be taking the risk and not me. Or so it seems. And this is where things get risky because that legal buffer, it might not necessarily protect you. Now at first, this felt like a major loophole. So let me break down how this is even possible. In the United States, we have something called a non-resident importer, or NRI for short. And the truth is, it is shockingly easy to become one. You don't have to be a US citizen, you don't need to have a local address, and you don't even need a US-based customs broker. A Chinese supplier can set up an NRI, import goods, and if they ever get flagged by Customs and Border Protection, no problem. They'll just spin up another shell company and keep going. It's like playing a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. Now at this point, I'm thinking, I want no part in this. It is blatant fraud and it's illegal. Sure, maybe it's a loophole now, But what happens if I place a large order and Trump closes that loophole 30 days later? Suddenly, my goods are stuck at the port, or worse, they are seized. I lose both the money and the inventory. But I'll admit, I was curious. How exactly is this fraud being pulled off at scale? By the way, if you're interested in learning how to start a profitable online store and the best way to find suppliers, make sure you sign up for my free 6-day e-commerce mini course below. It's 100% free, and I guarantee you'll learn a lot. So I asked more questions. I asked to see the paperwork. Who's filing it? Who's listed? What company is handling the actual customs documentation? And what I found shocked me even more. They weren't even planning to use a non-resident importer. They were going to use a US company. And here's how the scheme works. Freight forwarding companies are setting up US-based shell entities specifically designed to commit customs fraud. These entities act as the importer of record, handling the entire shipment on your behalf. And since they're registered as US companies, you're technically not buying from a Chinese supplier. You're buying from a US entity that happens to import from China, and on paper, it looks clean. Safe even. But dig a little deeper, and it's suspicious as hell. Now, I'm not entirely sure what happens when these shell companies get caught, but let's be real. If they're exposed, they just dissolve the entity and spin up a new one under a different name. It's like a revolving door. Now, the custom company I was referred to by my supplier has apparently done this for countless brands. And how do I know this? In the United States, every sea shipment that arrives is part of the public record. If you use a tool like Import Genius, Panjiva, or Import Yeti, you can look up any importer of record and see exactly how much they've been bringing in from China. So I ran a quick search, and what I found floored me. This isn't some fringe tactic. This is industrial scale fraud hiding in plain sight. This kind of tariff manipulation has been happening for years, mostly with no-name Chinese brands I've never heard of. It's not rare though, it is widespread. And here's the thing, no major US brand would ever touch this tactic. The risk is just too high. If they were to get caught, they would face massive fines, legal action, and a PR nightmare. But for a Chinese supplier or seller, if they get caught, the US can't do much. They can seize the goods, deny entry, and blacklist the importer of record, but that's just a paper company. It vanishes and another one pops up in its place. And that's just the beginning, because this next tactic might be even riskier. The next way Chinese suppliers are dodging tariffs is through transshipping. And here's how it works. Instead of sending goods directly to the United States, suppliers first ship them to a third country like Cambodia or Vietnam, where they secretly relabel the products with a new country of origin. And from there, the goods are shipped to the United States, now appearing to come from a neutral country. This way, they dodge the full 145% tariff that would have applied if the shipment had come straight from China. And believe it or not, this is still happening today. But the US, along with other countries, are finally starting to crack down. Take Vietnam, for example. Their Ministry of Trade just rolled out a new rule. They're now tightening checks on certificates of origin and cracking down hard on any attempt to fake where goods are made. Exporters are now required to submit detailed production records and supply chain documentation to prove the true origin of their goods, and that rule officially took effect on April 15th of this year. Thailand is also stepping up to avoid being used as a backdoor for Chinese exports. Their Department of Foreign Trade has expanded its watch list to include 65 high-risk product categories covering 224 tariff codes. These categories are now under enhanced scrutiny to prevent false declarations of origin. Before any US-bound shipment can leave, exporters must now go through a formal verification process. That means providing detailed documentation to prove where the goods were actually made. No more sneaking Chinese products through with a fake Made in Thailand label. And it's not just Vietnam and Thailand tightening the reins. South Korea has also started turning its back on China. Recently, Korean customs uncovered multiple tariff fraud cases where Chinese-made products were illegally relabeled as made in Korea. In just the first quarter of this year, the Korea Customs Service uncovered 29.5 billion won, which is about $20.8 million in US dollars, in origin-related violations. 97% of those shipments were headed to the US. That is a sharp increase from 2024, when Korea recorded 34.8 billion won in violations total, with only 62% tied to US-bound exports. So the problem is clearly getting worse. One case involved Chinese components being lightly assembled in Korea and passed off as Korean-made surveillance equipment worth 99 million yen. So in response, on April 21st, KCS launched a dedicated task force to investigate and prevent fraudulent export practices. They're also working directly with U.S. customs officials to coordinate enforcement and crack down on illegal transshipment. So what happens when the entire game of transshipment gets shut down? Where do the goods go then? Well, as enforcement tightens in countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and South Korea, many Chinese suppliers are now turning to smaller nations like Cambodia to reroute their shipments. But let's be real here. This is a short-term fix at best. It's not hard to imagine the red flags. If U.S. Customs suddenly sees $100 billion worth of goods flowing out of Cambodia, a country with a much smaller manufacturing base, it's going to raise some serious suspicions. This tactic only works as long as other countries look the other way. But with more governments stepping up enforcement, the loophole is closing fast. And under a second Trump administration, the consequences for fraud are getting far more severe. Knowingly falsifying a product's country of origin to avoid tariffs isn't just a slap on the wrist. It is a federal offense now. Penalties can include hefty fines and even prison time, up to 20 years, especially if the fraud is tied to a broader scheme involving conspiracy or wire fraud. The Department of Justice and U.S. Customs and Border Protection have ramped up enforcement, particularly targeting China to Vietnam transshipment schemes. So where does this leave you as the importer? Should you take the risk or should you walk away? Well, if you're relying on China, I know the DDP method might seem like an easy workaround. And on the surface, it looks clean, hassle-free, and low risk. But just because it looks clean doesn't mean that it is. And if your name ends up anywhere on the customs paperwork, even if you're not the importer of record, you could still be held liable. And the truth is, Chinese suppliers are getting desperate right now. And if these trends continue, the US could be staring down at over $100 billion in tariff fraud this year alone. So if you're in e-commerce or even thinking about importing, this is your wake-up call. Protect yourself, know what's going on behind the scenes, and share this video with anyone who imports from China. Now that you understand how China is avoiding tariffs right now, make sure you watch this video here to learn how to legally reduce your tariff bill.